Are we ready to start? We're ready to start. We are live on Facebook and YouTube, and welcome back to Master Coach University Assessment Immersion Training. This is our final live stream. Not just our final live stream in Assessment Immersion Training, but this is actually my final live stream of all the immersion training live streams. So if you've never seen this before, I run a school called Master Coach University where we really teach courses, coaches to master their craft, master their coaching skills and abilities, and we cover a lot on the business as well. But in these immersion trainings, these are our most advanced trainings, and where we really have a chance to dive deep in what I call immerse ourselves in a particular discipline of coaching. And when we talk about assessment as a discipline for coaching, we're really talking about helping our clients become aware and giving them realizations that they had not had before, bringing those awarenesses to their application to problems in their life and business, working with them on strategizing on, now that they're aware of something, what are they going to do about it? And how does that change how they want to approach strategy? So we use what we call psychographic analysis or psychographic assessment tools to help to kind of quicken that process rather than just kind of hunting around in the dark, trying to find answers to questions and kind of squeeze information out of a client. We can have them take 20, 30 minutes of assessments just online, and we very quickly can graph out what's going on in their natural behavioral, their style of approaching the world in life, their position in life. We can graph out what's most important to them emotionally and what are their drives. We can graph out how they think and what areas of thought, dimensionalities of thought, are they crystal clear in, and what areas are they blurry in, what areas do they value using or maybe even overuse versus ones that they might not use as much as they need to or they should. So when you want to know all this about somebody, you can really get to that realization, those aha moments with a client, in seconds versus in weeks or hours. So it's a tremendous accelerator. So I've been doing these live streams for years now during immersion trainings and several other of our basic trainings as well. And the whole point of doing them has been to cover and drill into higher level, more in-depth and more detailed focuses on different aspects of what I was training you in that we may not have had time for during training sessions or during the groups or during even the content in the course, just to take everything that we do, which is so comprehensive, and just like fill in and do some masonry around every little crack to make sure everything has been smoothed out. And this is it. This is the last one. So I'm sure something crazy will happen during this last live stream, and look out for that. But I can promise you this: I'm going to give you some access to some really great resources if you stick around to the end. And no matter what, whether you're in one of these trainings or not, you're definitely feel free to stick around and learn. And the great thing is today, other than some of the graphs maybe being something you're not totally familiar with, I think you're going to appreciate the different aspects of what we're going to cover in this particular live stream about how to build culture. That is what we're covering today. So let's get to it. So the point of all of this, the point of building culture, and really culture is, think of culture like it's the entity that's formed when more than one person comes together, right? When you have two people come together, a third entity is formed. When you have 400 people, 400,000 people, 400 million people come together, a country is formed, an organization is formed, a culture is formed, right? And so your family has a culture. Your intimate relationship has a culture. If you're a single mom, you and your child, you have a culture, right, that you form between the two of you, because it's more than just you, right? Now, maybe for a while it's just you, but eventually even a young person will have an impact on how that amalgam of several people comes together to organize. You have a culture, right? So culture is, think of it like it's the persistent part of an organization, a team, or a community. Your neighborhood, your part of the world. There's things about that group of people that are there that persist over time. Now, one day somebody might be like really nice and do this amazing thing, and it gets on the news, like saves a kitten, or contributes something to the local homeless shelter, and it's like, wow, that's amazing. But that doesn't necessarily happen every day. And there might be some really horrible things, like not the other day, like months ago now, there was a young woman, a teenager, was murdered in my neighborhood. I mean, not like right next door, but in my general vicinity, like within a 5-mile radius of my home. There's a kid was murdered. That doesn't happen every day. That's not a part of my culture, is murdering kids, right? But it happened. Every once in a while, all sorts of different things happen within human diversity and human variation. That those don't necessarily mean they're defined by culture. They're not cultural per se. But there are things in our culture that we know stay around over time. Now, over the last couple decades, we've seen actually quite a bit of like mass killing and kids doing it as well over, let's say, North America. And so one might actually argue that's cultural. Like there's a culture of violence, right, in our young communities, let's say, or with young males, at least, let's say. And one could argue that, right? But again, if it's not constantly happening, if it's not persisting, it's probably not culture. The whole point of a culture is that it persists over time, that it creates a constant, it creates a given, it creates a baseline of this is the way this group is, this is the way this country is, this is the way this organization is, right? You could say this is the way like Christianity is, or this is the way Google is as an organization. This is the way this is the way the Southeastern United States is, right? This is the way Japan is, right? So we're using these words to substitute for groups of people, and those groups of people do things from day to day that are quite different and diverse, right? There's all sorts of individual variation within Google, Christians and Muslims, Black people, white people, whatever, right? But then there's the Christian Muslim culture. There's the Black and white culture. There's the Google versus Apple culture, right? There's this government versus that government, or the Florida state government culture versus the Georgia state government culture versus the California state government culture. And there's things about those cultures or there's things about those groups that vary from day to day. And then there's things that persist all the time. And when it persists all the time, that's what I would call culture. So when we were talking about building a culture, think about it like you're building something that sticks around. You're building something that persists. So when you make a qualitative change in culture, like something that changes the quality of your culture, the quality of a culture that you have an impact with somehow, those qualitative changes in culture, they impact the success of that culture, right? So you have different quality culture, different level of success that culture achieves, right? If I impact the Google culture in a positive way, I give it better quality culture. It's not just a moment of better quality. It's an accident or a fluke. It's persisting through years and years of Google. I've made a change of the culture, not just to one person at Google now. And so I've made that change, that qualitative change it's going to impact the success of Google as a culture, right? It's also going to impact the growth of that culture. Some cultures aren't really made to grow necessarily, but many cultures are. Look at a corporate culture, usually growth is pretty important to those cultures. People that are going to benefit more from those cultures because they've grown. So if I qualitatively impact Google, that's going to impact the growth of Google. It's going to have an impact to the success and growth. And by the way, that will also impact whatever positive impact the organization or the culture has on the world, because every culture impacts the world. Every group of people has some impact on the world, no matter how small. It's some kind of impact. Google definitely has an impact on the world. Japan definitely has an impact. China, the United States, these cultures, huge impact on the world. So if we change the quality of the United States culture, then that will change the positive impact of that organization, that culture, on the rest of the human planet, the rest of the human organism. So when I wrote down here today, organize, I thought about this. We're talking about impacting organizations, right? Culture happens within an organization, right? If two people come together, they start to organize in some way. Even if they're not consciously doing it, you is organized. You might say, my family is not very organized. Well, they have an organization to them. There is a way that they organize themselves. Over time, there's some things that persist, and that's the organization called your family, right? And then parts of that organization persist, and those are the culture, right? So when I was thinking about how we impact organizations, I was thinking about this word organize. What an aspect of this word is, as I said, put in red here, it's this bloody thing called an organ, right? So when we think about an organ like my heart or your liver or your foot or something, that's not just a bunch of different cells that were thrown in a pot and mixed up in soup, right? It wouldn't be a very good heart or foot or liver then, right? Those cells are very organized. They've become an organ, right? So that what makes an organ, I mean, obviously something that's an organ in a body has a purpose. It's useful in some way. It fulfills its purpose. It does something. That's the quality of the organ. You can judge the quality of the organ, right? But it's organized, right? It's come together in a very specific way, a combination of parts that are organized in a particular order that produces the actual organ that it is. And so think of culture like an organ, right? Think of the United States as like this beating heart, right? It either pumps blood well or it doesn't pump blood well. You can have my business, Master Coach University. It's an organism, right? It's an organ that does things because many cells have come together individually now that's formed greater than the sum of its parts, and that there's some things that persist about that as people come and go, even. I can, my heart, maybe not my heart, but I mean, people argue this about the heart and the brain, but like my liver cells, I mean, thousands of them probably died today, but I still got a liver, right? So it's not about the individual cells. It's about they came together in a pattern, they organized into an organ, and it still does its job even to this day. People come and go from Google, but Google's still Google. It's a patternization. And so think about that when we're talking about culture. It's this organism. It's created an organ that's useful or not, that's helpful or not, that grows or doesn't. So if you have, let's talk about like negative impact for a second here. We talk about positive and qualitative changes. So there were some qualitative changes that happened in Germany's culture, 80 years ago or so, or 90 years ago. And originally it was just a normal culture, a perfectly upbeat form of society, evidently a democracy. And then suddenly, not necessarily suddenly, but over a period of years, it turned into a culture, a team that one aspect of it was really, the purpose of it was to kill large groups of people. And, if that's how that culture suddenly became organized, it wasn't like one day, one bad Nazi killed someone, right? That's not what happened, right? It was a pattern of killing, and then a pattern of killing, of course, a lot of people, not just one individual at one point. So that became persistent, and therefore it became cultural, right? And so that was a qualitative change that happened within that culture, and that qualitative change impacted the positive impact of that culture, as you might imagine. It radically diminished the positive impact. Like, hey, we built some, I mean, I'm sure there were positive things about the culture at the time. We built these amazing buildings. We organized to be successful. We can defend ourselves as a country. We're strong and powerful. I mean, nationalism was a really big thing. We have a lot of pride, right? But then it's like, oh yeah, and we killed all these people in the process. Well, so great. You have all this positive impact of this culture. And then there's this diminishment to that because there was all this killing going on. And by the way, eventually the immune system of humanity destroyed that culture, right? If you got a low quality enough culture that creates enough negative impact on the world will show up at your doorstep and kill you off, right? So the Nazi Germany, well, we had the world kind of came together and said, okay, this is a problem. They're killing everyone and they're trying to take over the world. I think it's time for that particular organism to go, right? And so, it was a bad organ. Originally the German culture, they were an organ that produced a GDP, happy people, maybe they had some wars, but in general, the world kind of put up with it at least. Suddenly it was an organism that had a really, really some negative qualitative aspects to it. And the human immune system said, let's just get rid of that one, right? And that was the end of them, right? So, and it's the same with a human organ. It's like if your human organs start to operate in a way that your body sees as foreign or let's say counterproductive, you can have an autoimmune issue, right? You could start like type 1 diabetes. Like, I'm going to kill off my pancreatic cells because there's a problem. We don't see them as functional anymore. Right. So we diminish and destroy that organ because it's qualitatively, we've judged it in a different way. Now that's a dysfunction in the immune system as well. Right. But bottom line is, coming back to this kind of idea of the Nazi culture, I'm sure it had some positive impact, but it had a huge negative impact. Again, not to try to be a historian here, but low quality culture, Nazi culture destroyed. Right. So, again, it's like thinking about it like cancer, right? It was a cancer in human society, the way that if you have cancer in your body, your immune system ideally comes together to destroy that cancer, right? Now, a lot of times your immune system doesn't figure that out and the cancer kills off the body. So, but think about this, like cancer is a human cell, right? So you've got cells in your organs that are just more of you, right? Human cells, it's your cells. So you are the cancer, basically, right? It's like, it's more of versions of you. Nazis were humans, right? They were not the best humans, probably, right? They did a bunch of bad things, but they were still humans. They were still a part of that human organism, right? So if you've got these cancer cells, it's still you. And of course, we know, even though cancer is a very weak and dysfunctional cell, a lot of people think cancer is so strong because it's so hard to kill. It's easy to kill cancer. You're just going to kill yourself along with it, right? You die, your cancer dies, right? If you take cyanide, I guarantee the cyanide is going to kill your cancer just as it kills you as well. So cancer is not hard to kill, but the problem is you're not that hard to kill either. And it's hard to differentiate between the two. So cancer is actually very weak and dysfunctional cells. And if those weak and dysfunctional cells end up organizing enough, I mean, they're not the most organized cells, but they organized into a group, into like a tumor or a body that expands, that eventually could kill you off, right? That eventually can create a low quality experience for your body. And so killing the cancer is also killing you. But of course, we don't kill the cancer. Cancer kills you as well. So this is the tricky part about culture, is that we look at a culture, and we see this nowadays. I mean, they write whole books about culture wars, this culture versus that culture. And of course, whichever cultures are, at odds with each other, they look at the other culture like the cancer, like those liberals are the cancer on our society. Those, conservatives are the cancer on our, it's just like it's like just pointing fingers at other humans, right? But bottom line is, they're just humans that have formed a different pattern. They've organized differently than maybe another group. And so they have various qualities. Change the quality of that culture, you change the positive or negative impact, and you change its success or failure as a culture as well. And so cultures come and go, but some aspects of those cultures, like as they maintain themselves as cultures, they persist, and that's the part of them that makes them culture. So I'll give you a couple examples here. One form of low quality culture is something that we call monoculture. Monoculture. Now, this is a term that's, I believe, generally used in farming more than anything else. And so when they talk about a monoculture in farming, they talk about growing one thing only over vast distances. So it's like, I'm just growing, blueberries for like miles and miles and miles, right? And that's a monoculture. It's just blueberries. And like, you could still do it, and you can sort and organize that particular culture according to blueberries. Like, this is all the stuff we got to do for blueberries, right? Kill these weeds, give them this kind of soil, put these inputs in, plant these particular blueberry seeds. There, you got miles and miles of blueberries, right? The problematic aspect of that particular culture, of monoculture, is that there are like any singular like plant has positive and negative impacts on the soil, the environment around it, and on itself as well. Like, blueberries will attract very specific insects, right? And so all of a sudden you're getting more cicadas or more grasshoppers or more cinch bugs or whatever likes blueberries. I don't know. But so, you had this field that didn't have any of those insects, or maybe just a few because it was diverse. Now you just got nothing but blueberries. All of a sudden you got this multiplicity of problems that you didn't have before because of that monoculture, right? So monoculture brings like bigger crop of one thing, bigger problems of that sort, right? And so bottom line is, it's not a great way to sustainably persist a positive result in agriculture. And we can actually see the same thing in human cultures as well. If you don't have enough diversity within a particular culture, that culture can create very relatively typical problems to whatever that type of individual is that's forming that culture. So I'll give you an example. I did a consult once with a fairly successful mortgage company called Union Fidelity. They were based out of San Diego, and they had like 100 loan officers, and they were making hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay. And they were just printing money. Okay. So this was in the early 2000s when real estate was just exploding, and there were no rules about like anybody could get a loan. And Union Fidelity just came out of nowhere, and they just exploded, and they took advantage of that no rules atmosphere for them to print money for themselves and their team ultimately. And so I walked into Union Fidelity, and I talked to them. I asked them, what's your turnover? And like, when do you have to fire people? Like, how long does that take? And the guy said, we don't fire people. They quit. Oh, no, actually, no, it's the opposite. Sorry, reverse that. People don't quit. We fire them. And I said, well, wait a second. What do you mean? And the guy said, well, the thing is, as soon as they stop performing, we don't give them a moment. We just eject them immediately. As soon as we stop making money with them, we just get rid of them, because we're going to replace them with somebody that we think can make us money. So we don't have any patience for them at all. They wanted a monoculture of people that only made them massive amounts of money and nothing else. They wanted nothing but blueberries, right? They had a monoculture. And so I said, well, look, I'm going to discover who the highest performing people are on your team and how you can get more of those. And we were talking about getting more of the really high performers. And so we ran values analysis, and we ran DISC analysis, and we found out they were all the same. Like, everybody had the same values. And the values that they had were money at the detriment and at the cost of everything else in your life. That was the culture that they had formed, that they had hired for, which you could imagine, if somebody who thinks and feels that way, they're probably going to make more money than the next guy. They might break a bunch of rules. They might not have tremendous ethics. They might have situational ethics. They might damage the culture overall. They might hurt other people around them, but they'll make more money than the next guy that you just fired. right? So they ended up with a monoculture of nothing but this type of person. It was only about money. The entire business was only about money. And guess what happened? The locusts came in. And in this case, the locusts were in the form of two things. One was the type of people that worked there. And number two was 2008, when suddenly everything went kaput with the real estate market and they didn't have anywhere near as much business. And then all the regulation came in the following years that they weren't quite ready for. And so guess what happened to all these blueberries? They all died. All these money-making people found that their income was cut in half or cut in thirds, and so that, since there was no reason to stick around Union Fidelity, right? Like, it wasn't a fun place to work. It wasn't like a nice culture where people had friends. It wasn't something where there was more to it than just the money. So as soon as the money went away, everybody quit, everybody left, everybody destroyed themselves and their own organization. And the people who were in charge of the organization just closed it. That was it. They didn't have the staying power. They were actually a weak organism. They were weak. They looked like they were strong, but they were weak. Just like cancer looks like it's strong because it's growing and growing and growing, but it's actually the weakest cells in your entire body that can most easily be killed. That's why chemotherapy works when it does. I mean, sometimes it kills us too, but chemotherapy is a low-grade poison generally, and it's just like kind of poisonous. And since your cancer cells are the weakest cells in your body, that poison kills those cancer cells. It doesn't distinguish between them, but it prejudicially kills those cells. And then the rest of you is not doing that great because you're poisoned, but you're still around, right? That's why it works. So they were actually very weak, even though they looked strong and they were growing like a cancer was, but they were a monoculture. They were not a polyculture. They were not a diverse food forest of trees and fruit and blueberries and strawberries and kale and bananas. It wasn't a variety of different crops that could be rotated, or maybe crops and animals. And I mean, you look at polyculture, for instance, every time you add a different candidate inside that culture, it radically changes the culture. It radically skews the culture. So like in agriculture, if you just grow grass and nothing else, the grass eventually just dies. It gets too tall and it dies. It's a tall poppy syndrome, right? And then you just got a desert, right? But if you grow grass and then you bring the cows in, it's another candidate for that culture, right? Cows and grass, very different, living beings, right? The cows eat the grass. Looks like they're killing the grass, but they're not. They're actually helping the grass to be healthy. And what happens is when the grass grows, the roots grow down deep in the soil and penetrate the soil and make for more aerated soil. But they also sap nutrients from the soil. So what happens is cows eat the grass, and the huge roots that this grass is built, because it's got such tall grass, suddenly the grass has a signal that says, we don't need all these roots anymore. And the roots just slough off. The roots just break off, basically. And the roots die. Most of the roots die. There's like tiny little bit stalk of grass, and you got these tiny little roots now. Whereas before there were all these roots. Those roots die, but those roots actually bring nutrients into the soil, and the bacteria and the fungi and all the stuff in the soil eats up those roots and actually brings nutrition back into the soil that wasn't there before. And the whole cycle can happen again. The grass can go tall again, recycle itself, and then the cows can come and eat the grass. By the way, the cows don't just eat the grass, they also poop all over the field. And guess what they're doing? They're fertilizing the field. So it looks like a mess to have, blueberry or grass and cows together. It's like these two don't really fit. They're not like best friends. One's eating the other. It's like, this does not look like a really good culture, but it's actually much more sustainable than a monoculture of one or the other. Just cows, you get a bunch of dead cows. They need grass. Just grass, you get a desert because the grass dies eventually. Cows and grass that rotate enough, that culture can create a persistent a persistent growth of the cow and persistent growth of the grass as well. You get harvests of both. Now, if you bring the chickens in and the chickens eat the grubs that are, getting planted in the cow patties and all this kind of stuff, then they have a different fertilizer that happens and they pick through the grass differently. I mean, there's all this cool stuff you can have. So you insert, instead of just blueberries or just grass, you have like 5 or 6 different inputs, different candidates in that culture, different diverse aspects of the culture. Suddenly you have something that's takes very little fertilizer, takes very little chemicals, takes very little inputs, and yet it's self-sustainable and persists. And it creates all this positive qualitative value for the world. We had a comment here. Longevity depends on the system's capacity to maintain its internal homeostasis and with resilience to external disruptions. Great point. Yeah, because if you're a monoculture, you're weak for external disruptions a lot of times. That diversity can create strength. Adapting internally without undermining the overall cohesion required to survive. Like if I did nothing but sleep, I would not have resilience, right? Because I wouldn't have any musculature, I wouldn't have any blood pressure, I'd have hormonal problems, right? But if I don't get enough sleep, I don't have a diversity of sleep and wake cycles, then I'm going to have other hormonal problems, right? So I'm more resilient because of the hormesis of getting up and stressing myself and exercising. That stressor on the system makes me more resilient to problems. But I also need the rest as well. So I need all this diversity of different things to make me resilient, to maintain my homeostasis, as you say. So bottom line, coming back to monoculture versus polyculture, we see in human systems, just like in agricultural systems, monoculture is not a good thing. You get too much of any particular thing, culture doesn't persist, or it starts to create really, really bad results. And of course, then hopefully the immune system of humanity takes over and kind of kicks them out, right? You see this with countries and war. You see this with organizations like this organization, antitrust. They're not doing the right things. They're breaking the law. We got to break them down. We got to split them up. We're going to make them more diverse. We've got to shift those cultures because they're creating problems for us. They're not just doing good things. Their quality is starting to turn sour, right? So when we introduce these new type of people, in this case, to a culture, they radically skew the culture. If I had a chance, if I had time to take Union Fidelity and say, look, you're unsustainable now, they wouldn't have believed me because they were so hungry and high on cash. But had I been influential enough with them to help them to understand, like, look, if it's all about money, you guys are going to die, because as soon as the money gets hard, and it will eventually, markets go up and down. It's not just forever, going up, right? Markets correct. Bubbles happen, and they were in a bubble at the time. If you can make this more than just that one aspect, that monoculture, you can bring people in that aren't just about that, but they do a good job. They take care of others around them. They do good management work. They're supportive, right? And you can mix it up a bit. Maybe you could bring a regulator in so you guys follow the rules in a better way. You find a way to have somebody who's worried about stability, not just growth. You guys could actually stick it out when you've diversified yourselves to be more resilient and maintain homeostasis as an organization, as an organism in the corporate world, right? So if I introduce those people in, it would skew that culture, it would radically shift that culture. And a lot of people would probably say initially, that's not a good thing, right? That differentiation is not good. But when we see, like, for instance, esophageal cells, like when the tube that goes from the mouth to the stomach, when they see esophageal cells that have no differentiation, they're basically like the same cell over and over again, they know that's the beginning of cancer. And it's a really bad cancer. You don't want that cancer. You're pretty much dead if you're going to get that. So lack of differentiation in certain cells in our bodies equals cancer, because it's basically a cell that just keeps replicating. It's a clone of itself, and it's not different enough. There's not enough diversity within those cells to create a normal organized system. So differentiation, diversity is important for proper organization, qualitative improvements to the organism, right? So every new type of person skews the culture, changes the culture. I'll give you one example. there is a coaching organization that I've coached for years. Some of you have heard me talk about them. And when I first started working with them, they only had two types of people that worked there. They had organized people that just did the internet marketing, and then they had salespeople, and that was it. Sales and marketing. Really, they didn't even have that much marketing. It was mostly sales. It was pretty much a monoculture. So I didn't actually ask them to do this, but they somehow figured it out on their own before I really had a chance to get my hands dirty with this part. But they ended up hiring some very introverted people that were not driven by the corporate, like, money-making thing of sales and marketing. And they were just really good at building systems to support all the people that worked there. And then they also introduced somebody who was head of fulfillment, who hired coaches that were really just there to help the people that were hiring them, that were spending money. So they had these amazing salespeople that on their own were doing okay, but then they started hiring and differentiating with lots of different people. So we had these people that were like very administrative, and then we had these people that were much more like seat of the pants, go forward, just make a bunch of sales and make money types. And they all were in the same executive team, and they were in the same organization. And it was not always a harmonious team, but they were mature enough to work with different types of people, to accept the diversity rather than expect a monoculture. And they've grown from 1 million a year to 5 million a year as a result of many things, but that was a huge aspect of it. They all depend on each other. They're interdependent, right? So that kind of qualitative improvement to that culture was dependent on certain diversity that was introduced at the right time in the right way with the right amount of money to make this magic formula work. Without that, I'll tell you, years before that, like decades before, there were several salespeople on that team that were very good at selling, and they could make money, but they were making just enough money for themselves, and they were never growing. And it happened like that for decades until these team members that I saw their development created diversity within the culture, and all of a sudden they grew like crazy. It's amazing what you do, or what you can do with the right culture, with the right organization. So here's a deeper aspect of the point that I'm attempting to make, like kind of my thesis here for this last live stream. Although you can make temporary impact that contradicts a culture, like you can walk in one day and say, everybody's going to do this today, and they'll just kind of force them to do it. The culture will always prevail, right? You can come in and try to make blueberries act like bananas, but as soon as you leave, those blueberries are going to go back to doing what blueberries do. It's in the DNA of the blueberry, right? So the culture prevails. It's like a rubber band. You pull it, harder it's going to snap back. Right? So don't think that as a coach, or an organizational coach, team coach, corporate coach, executive coach, you can walk in and massively change an organization just by like coaching one person, or just by giving a speech or something, because generally it doesn't happen. Why? Because you didn't change the culture. You just changed something that day, and that just changes back as soon as you're unless you add yourself to the culture as a permanent fixture, culture doesn't change. Culture doesn't change. Organization doesn't change. Organization doesn't change. The quality, growth, and success or failure of that organization, the trajectory that organization is on, they're going to stay going in that trajectory, down or up, whatever direction it is. So you want to change an organization, you got to change the culture. That's the point here. So I'm going to show you kind of an ideal model of culture for corporations and organizations. And this particular idea is taken from a well-known, very, very high-level thought leader and business teacher. His name is Ichak Adizes. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but bottom line is he wrote the book on corporate life cycles, the growth and death of a corporation. And he talks about this kind of like every life, like a human life, corporation's life is like a human's life. You grow and you grow and you grow and you get stronger and stronger and better and better. And eventually you hit kind of your apex one day, you peak, right? And then every day after that day, you're just getting kind of weaker and dumber and smaller and more diminished, if you will, in like pure biological terms, at least, until the day you die, right? So you have a growth period, you have a peak, and then you have a decline, right? And he said every corporation is the same. Every corporation has, is born like a baby, it grows, it peaks, it reaches its apex, and then it declines and dies eventually. Every organization does that. And it's funny, I was listening to Warren Buffett the other day, talking about investing, one of the most successful investors of all of history, basically, still alive today, wealth of wisdom for when it comes to organizational success, in many ways at least, not in every way. And he was trying to make a point about investment and investing, because people walk in and they invest in companies like, once they decide this company's good, they just assume that company is going to be good forever. They just assume, hey, if you've got a company that's going up like this, like it's up and to the right, right? Like the stock is going like that, that's just going to keep going. It's never going to change, right? And so Warren Buffett explained, he said, I'd ask you to do this. Go back 100 years and look at the S&P 500. Look at all the biggest companies in the world that, the S&P, they're standardized, legitimate organizations. Look at the list of those companies. You're going to be hard pressed to find any of those companies that exist today, still even exist, much less are on the S&P and are successful. Like almost, like I think it's 99% of the companies are literally dead. And on top of that, 0 of the companies that were in the S&P 500 100 years ago are in the S&P 500 today. Like U.S. Steel and all these kind of like staples of industry 100 years ago, none of them are in the S&P. Then none of them are even big enough. They've declined over time. And then he went one further, because one might think, well, 100 years. I mean, I'm going to be around not 100 years, so I can rely on this going up at least during my lifetime, can't I? And then Warren Buffett said, now try this. Look at the companies that are in the S&P 500 20 years ago. You'll find that almost all of them are still not even in the S&P today. So these companies are a lot more mortal than people seem to think. All the big soldiers of today, Facebook and Google and Apple and big companies, Tesla nowadays, people are excited about, whatever else, Coca-Cola. 100 years from now, they'll probably all be dead, or there'll be a different company. And 20 years from now, many of them probably won't even exist in their current size and form to be on a legitimate exchange. That's corporations, just like a human being, going to an apex and then dying. So he explains that for a human life, as for a corporate life, once the entity is born, there's 2 things that you measure. And you can easily measure this in a human as well. So let's think about it from the human metaphor for this moment. When you're born, you're a single cell. You're basically not even quite human yet, right? You're a human cell, but you're not much else. And so you have no control and no flexibility, but very, very quickly, once you're born into the world, you're extremely flexible. You get really flexible really fast. So you see a baby, or a 1-year-old or 2-year-old or 3-year-old, they are like infinite possibility. Like they don't really have any control over, they can't even control their bowels, much less the rest of themselves at that point, right? They're totally out of control, no control, but they have a tremendous amount of flexibility already. They can be laughing 1 minute and crying the next, right? Sleeping 1 minute, awake the next. They could be a policeman 1 second, and they can be an athlete the next, right? So they're totally flexible. Like everything is possible for them. And there's a moment at some point during a young life where you reach your peak of flexibility, right? Maybe it's in your teens or early 20s or something in there probably, but you reach this peak of flexibility where you can't be anything anymore. Like maybe like your peak flexibility is like 10.5 or 11.5. And so for years and years, you become more flexible. Like you're all these infinite possibilities are appearing to you, and you're looking at all of them, and you could kind of like take any of them on. And then one day you start saying, no, I'm just going to be an astronaut. And you start diminishing your flexibility. You start diminishing your possibilities. You start cutting them down. That's a part of life. It's not a bad thing. It's just an aspect of what occurs in human life. So then there's less and less flexibility over time. Right now, as this process is happening, your baby who has no control slowly creates more control. It's like, now I can control going to the bathroom. Now I can control eating. Now I can control talking. They have more and more what you might call strength, but I just call it control. That's Adizes' definition here. And they get more and more control over time. And at one point in life, their control peaks. In other words, they get the maximum amount of total control over something, not flexibility. We're talking about, can I do this thing? Am I the best gymnast? Am I the best consultant? Am I the best, joker, comedian? Right? They get to this point where they have the most control. They have the most like ability to produce this one singular result, let's say, and they have mastery over that, right? Or let's say generally in their life, they have the most control in their life over their life and themselves. And then eventually, again, that peaks and they start to lose control. They have less and less control over this period of their decline. Their control also declines. So what peaks first is flexibility and then control. And so what happens here is as your child's flexibility is declining, their control is still increasing. Right? So maybe this is 16, right? Or 12 or something. And they start to get less and less flexible now. Their most flexible days of infinite possibility are now behind them. But guess what? 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 25, they're learning their math, they're learning their English, they're still adopting all this knowledge. And maybe at 27 or something, let's say, they hit this point where they're still getting more control. They're still increasing their control, right? They haven't stopped that growth yet, but they have the maximum point of their ability to control that is also crossing their maximum point of their ability to be flexible. This is what prime is right here. Maximum control with flexibility. So maximum flexibility is here, maximum control is here, but when you're maximum flexibility, you got very little control. You got maximum control, you got almost no flexibility, right? Or very little. So if you get the best of both worlds, that's prime. And so when somebody says, I'm in my prime, really what that could mean, if you choose to make it mean this, is I've got the most control with the most flexibility. I have the most possible, not infinite anymore, but I've got still a ton of possibilities, and I got a whole lot of control over those possibilities. I've brought those together. And when you can be flexible enough and agile enough because you got all these possibilities still, and you can still have enough control to like get something done and make something happen, you're in your prime. Like career-wise, that's your prime. Health-wise, that's your prime, right? Relationship-wise, that's like any part of somebody's life, they can hit their prime. Like there was a moment, like think about like from an intimate relationship perspective, even there was a moment at 18.5 where you had the most possibilities for the most possible intimate relationships like you'll ever be able to imagine. You were just open to anyone or just like exploring or dating a lot, whatever, right? You had maximum flexibility, right? A lot of people say that's not a great thing. Right? But you had that flexibility, but you didn't have a lot of control. You go on a date and be like, oh my gosh, that was a horrible date. And then you went on another date and it was great, but you had no predictability. You couldn't predict whether it was going to be good. You were just all over the map, right? And then your flexibility was diminishing. You cut a lot of people off, said not that one, not that one. That one's a jerk. That one's a dud. You continue to get more control to the point where you're like, I still got a lot of options, but I have a lot of control over how I'm going to experience those options and how I contribute to those. And you hit your prime. Now, hopefully at some point during this process of, maximum control, maximum flexibility, or both, you found, a great mate, and you guys had total, enough control and flexibility to have a great life together. Not everybody does that. They hit their prime and they move past it, and, they still don't have that relationship, right? So, so that, again, that can happen with career. I've got all these different career options, but I don't really know which one I'm good at. And then eventually you're like, okay, now I'm really good at this, and I've still got some options. I'm going to narrow this down even more, and I've got enough control. And then you just grow like crazy during that time. You hit your prime, right? So that's prime in a human life, let's say, biologically, career-wise, relationally, etc. And of course, after that prime, your flexibility continues to diminish, and you get really old, like you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s, you got very little flexibility, not just like mentally, right? A lot of people get set in their ways, they say. You're just less mentally flexible and emotionally flexible, but you're also like physically, you get rigid, right? More and more rigid, more and more inflexible, more inability to do a variety of things with your body. You can see like stuff gets taken away, right? Those options. But even like some people are 60 years old, but they're hitting maximum control. Like they're not the most flexible person in the world anymore, but man, are they good at that thing that they do, right? So they're hitting maximum control here. But eventually, as they age even more, 65, 70, they start to lose that control as well. And so the first time after birth, at least, control and flexibility meet, that's prime. That's the prime of your life. The next time control and flexibility meet, they're coming down, and that's death. Because total rigidity, zero flexibility is death, and then zero control, basically, that's probably somewhere in the ballpark of death. Although a lot of people, you lose a lot of control before death. But of course, we're right before zero here when they both meet again. So it's only downhill from here. So basically is the point. But the bottom line on this is that there's an apex for both of these, like the overlap of both, the best of both worlds that people are looking for to hit prime. It's the best of both worlds, not just the best of one or the other. If you're really flexible, no control, that's not great. If you're really controlled but very little flexibility, that's not great either. That's not as strong. It's not as resilient. Okay. So you cross once and then you cross again when everything diminishes basically to zero and you lose all of it. And your control stays around for quite a bit of time because that control is more usually based upon knowledge and certain abilities and relationships you've built and a life you've built, money you've piled up, that kind of stuff. So that diminishes more slowly than your flexibility. So people are just really rigid, but they still have a lot of power, let's say. But over time, that power as well diminishes, and eventually that's the end. So let's look at this from the perspective of an organization, shall we? So organization is born, tremendous flexibility very quickly, but very little control. Like you don't have a lot of power, a lot of money, can't really make a lot of things happen, but you could be anything. You could be a real estate company one day and a consultant the next day and, a food product producer the next day, because like you haven't built a lot of stuff. You're not IBM yet, right? So you're not stuck in, you're not pigeonholed yet. So you have very little control, but a lot of flexibility. Eventually you peak out with flexibility, start diminishing those. You get more and more control, money, human resources, goodwill, partnerships, marketing, mind share, all these kind of good things that protect you and preserve your ability to control the result. You get more and more, eventually you come together and hit prime. And an organization that has tons of flexibility with tons of control is the ideal organization. If you get an organization that is in its decline and it's not very flexible and it's just like a bureaucracy, and we're going to talk about that in a second, it's like that's not a very strong organization. It's very rigid. It could get destroyed. Like IBM was really diminished for a great amount of time by Microsoft and eventually Apple and other competitors because IBM lost their flexibility. They had a lot of control, a lot of money, not a lot of flexibility, a lot of customers, not a lot of flexibility, but more flexible companies that were not quite in their prime yet, like Microsoft and Apple, were like, let's do this. Let's create this computer. Let's use DAWs in this way. Let's use this pointing device. And they put all this cool new technology together, and they use Prime to be competitive with these high control Leviathans, and they were able to beat, because they were able to beat IBM for a long time, because they were in their prime and IBM was past their prime. Make sense? So this is strength, this is not, even though it looks strong here, when control is still at its peak. And of course, eventually they lose control as well, and they diminish even more. So prime organizations, where they're still entrepreneurial, they can still make changes, they can still grow and try new things, but they also have enough control where they have a lot of firepower, they've got some dry powder, they've got a lot of money, or a lot of partnerships, or a lot of human resources, a lot of resourcefulness. That's their prime. They can do amazing things with it in their prime, and they're very competitive. Before their prime, they might struggle. After their prime, they're definitely going to struggle. And eventually, of course, these organizations, they turn into bureaucracies. They lose all their flexibility. They become rigid, and they become wards of the state, where we just give them like Greyhound buses, like we give them money just to stay alive, right? They're not really a growing organization anymore. They had their day. And slowly they lose more and more control, to the point where they die or mutate into something else, right? So this is a corporation prime, just like it is human prime, if you will. So I'm going to show you what this model looks like on this site, and I'll give you the link to this site later. Let me see if I can share my screen. We're going to have a drug experience in just 3, 2, 1 now. And let's just pull up. Actually, I'm going to split these. So this is Ichak Adizes' technology that he kind of came up with to codify the rise and fall of organizations. And you can think of this from the perspective of a country, or just any human team, for whatever their purpose is. But especially, he modeled this for corporations, corporate organizations, more specifically, money-making entities, if you will. And these, of course, are organizations that are some of the higher paying organizations for coaches and consultants. So it's a great place to look as a model. And so they have this this rise from what they call courtship, which is basically where you're just kind of getting together with people and saying, let's do this, let's do this. And then you go through infancy, where you struggle just to survive, and then you go through what's called go and adolescence, where you're really growing an organization, and then finally you hit prime, where you're hitting this apex, right? And when you hit that apex, you want to maintain it. And what happens is the organizations peak after prime when they're not maintaining prime, because guess what? As long as you're maintaining your prime, your peak flexibility with your peak control, you're not at the peak yet, because you're going to keep growing. So the fall of an organization is always at a high point. They're already past their prime. They just kept growing on momentum. Does that make sense? So prime is actually before a peak, and you never want to peak as an organization. So if you can maintain prime, the peak is always in front of you. The top of the mountain, this is a mountain that has no top, because you'll always find a higher top ultimately. That's the idea here. So the fall actually is a higher point than prime is, and everybody's like applauding you and how great your organization is, but you've actually already begun to fail. And then you hit what they call aristocracy, and what they call recrimination, which is where that's infighting, and people are like pointing fingers as to what went wrong and everything. And then, like we saw, like for instance, Intel go through this recently. Intel hit their prime long ago, probably 10 years ago or something, where they were just like flexible as heck, and they were always making like the next chip, and they were always on the cutting edge, and they were beating everybody else's technology. And then eventually they got really rich, and they rested on their laurels, and then AMD started making better chips, and Intel just ignored it. Like they didn't compete. Like they just were like, okay, whatever, we're just going to do what we do. And that was a sign of aristocracy, which was way after the fall. Right? Nobody even noticed the fall. Everybody was just still thinking Intel's number one. They're amazing. Right? And they thought they were number one as well. And then now what's happening, the recent years of Intel, as Intel stock tanks and the company goes in decline, is that they're saying, well, there's something wrong with the leadership there. There's something wrong with these people. These people made mistakes, and everybody's pointing fingers. They're in recrimination, right? Now, if they can pull back to prime, maybe they can do okay. They're trying to bring in new leadership. But whether or not that's possible at this point, whether or not, well, I'm sure it's possible. Whether or not that happens is, kind of remains to be seen. So bottom line, there's this fall that happens, and all these people are self-important aristocrats, and then they start to decline, and they're pointing fingers and kind of eating each other up and backbiting and stuff. And then they fall into bureaucracy, which is basically like an organization that's on life support, right? All they do is like what they've been taught, and they're just dogmatic. It's kind of like what IBM was when Microsoft beat them. IBM was just bureaucratic. Like, this is just what we do. We always do the same stuff, right? And then again, if you don't pull back from these fall type of periods, eventually that organization dies. So that is just one picture, one way to look at corporate strength and weakness. And when you share this kind of model with your corporate customer, no matter what stage they're in, they might be a 2-person organization, they might be a 2 million person organization, they can start to see themselves and see some of their maladies and some of their strengths and weaknesses inside these different models. And I definitely invite you to check out this website. I'm going to put the link later on when we're done with the live stream, and you can actually go into each of these stages and read more about them, and really dive deep into this stuff. And we're going to talk about some of this stuff right now. We're not going to go that deep, but we're going to do it for the purpose of kind of modeling how you look at groups, organizations, and changing culture such that you can move culture in the direction of prime, as we're going to get to that in a second. And then also definitely check out these books, Managing Corporate Lifecycles. This is the original, and he's got a bunch of others as well that I'm sure are very valuable to check out. So that said, let's talk about like some of these stages in the corporate life cycle, and how you might identify like the kind of team that would epitomize that stage. This live stream, speaking of this, like this subject, actually came out of one of the questions that you as a student asked. One of our students said, we were talking about culture and looking at these graphs of different people and hiring different people for different positions. And one of our students said, well, how do you know you need that person or not? Like, if you need that person, we know who to hire, like psychographically, to fill that spot. But how do you know that spot is ready to be filled? How do you know it's time to build the organization, build the team in that particular respect? And I thought about it for a second, and my answer was this. It's like, you got to know where your organization customer is in their growth stage, because every growth stage needs something different. It needs different people, needs different mindsets. It needs different things to be strengths versus other stages. So if you're really strong for one stage, but you're not in that stage, might not be a good time for you to be like that, right? So you could do the right thing at the wrong time and still fail, right? So this is about the timing of this. Let's see, we had so how can it maintain prime? That's what we're literally going to start answering that. And what you're going to see as we go through these different stages, and we're not going to go through every one, but you're going to see signs of that stage and what needs to change in order to move it to the next stage, to get towards prime, because you don't start an organization in prime, right? Or if an organization has fallen into bureaucracy, let's say, what are the signs of that? And how do we move it back towards prime in terms of building the culture, dropping this new person in to change the vanilla to chocolate, to get to a tipping point where, like, if you have vanilla ice cream, you add chocolate syrup, it's vanilla, 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 but there's a tipping point where all of a sudden everything's chocolate, right? And we can do that with an organization, hit a tipping point, a cultural tipping point, to move it towards prime if it still has yet to achieve it, or move it back from the fall, or these various different pathologies, if you will, to move it back into the stage it needs to be in, or prime if it's already achieved some prime at some point in its life cycle. So let me get to the slides here, and let's get going with it. So we're not going to go through every single part of the life cycle, but we're going to take this life cycle that we've been talking about, and we're going to break it down to a couple of these stages and what the culture might ideally look like in that stage, so you can see where the current culture of an organization might be skewed from what's necessary in that time frame, like in that stage of the life cycle. So we're just looking through different steps in the process of the growth process of a company, and then what culture is needed during that part of the growth process to make it grow the best during that time. Now, by the way, one of the things you're going to notice is the companies you're consulting, or your organization, or you are not the right, you're not the right psychographic profile for that stage in your particular developmental stage. And that's okay. Think of these not like these are the people you have to be. So if you're not that person, you got to get rid of you. Think of them as mindsets. Like any of us can be a D or an I or an S or an C on the behavioral profile, right? That may not be natural for us, but we can adapt in order to serve what's needed in the moment. Any one of us can learn to value values that we don't currently value to serve what's needed at that stage in our development, right? That's called maturing. Like when you're 3, it's okay to go bathroom in your pants, but when you're 30, it's not a good thing, right? You got to learn something. You got to, there's a maturing or there is an adaptation process that happens as we mature as human beings. And that adaptation process needs to happen somewhat with some of the individuals in an organization as they grow the organization. And yes, with a lot of companies, just hire for it. Just bring those people in to make the organization fit where they are in the life cycle. So let's start with courtship. So this is like the first stage in the life cycle. And I'm going to read you a little bit about courtship, and then we're going to talk about what that might look like in behavioral and values hierarchies within a culture. So courtship is where the company's not even, it's like pre-born. Like it hasn't even been born yet. It exists as a gleam in the founder's eye. So it's like a dream, right? The focus of courtship is on dreams and possibilities. It's just like creative, right? Total flexibility, no control, right? You don't even exist yet. You got no control, right? But it's all like infinite possibilities that you're discussing, right? Dreams. And by the way, how many things could you dream of? How many possibilities can you imagine? It's infinite, right? That's like infinite flexibility. In fact, organizations don't start with 0 flexibility. They start with infinite flexibility, and they diminish from there, actually. So it's maybe a little bit different. This is just our biological model of it. So in courtship, you have a founder. There's always a founder, somebody that starts that bears the baby into the world. And the founder is someone with unreasonable conviction in the face of insufficient evidence. So they just have like faith, if you will. And it's crucial that the founders believe that the company is going to succeed and are committed to doing whatever it takes to make the new company succeed. So they need like infinite faith and infinite commitment. That's required for courtship to grow into infancy and not just be an affair. And we'll talk about that in a second. So there are normal problems during this stage of the life cycle. And you might notice some of these if you're still in courtship, if you're pre-revenue or pre-commitment stage and you're like part-time or something, this is where you're at. So these are totally common problems. They're actually good problems to have. They actually mean that you're in courtship at some level. Overly excited, possibly unwarranted excitement, fuzzy on many details, like you don't really know what you're going to do exactly. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They like to call this FUD nowadays, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Like what is going to happen? I'm afraid. I'm not sure what's going on. I doubt this will work, that kind of thing. Totally normal. Mixed goals. Mixed goals meaning like you haven't decided the one goal for you in the organization yet. You want to make a lot of money and change the world, right? A lot of coaches are like, I want both. Well, guess what? To really go into infancy, you have to move it down to one goal for the organization. You might have other goals for yourself, but the organization's got to have a singular focus in order to get to infancy, or else it's just an affair. It's just like you're fooling around trying lots of stuff. Let's see. Bad problems. These are problems that are like actually not good problems to have. Low commitment level, like a try and see attitude. You can imagine that's not going to work well for courtship. Overthinking the details, stalling. So like somebody who's caught up in analysis paralysis, right? That's a problem for courtship. They never get started. They never get off the block. Lack of fear. You should be a little afraid in courtship, or maybe even a lot afraid. If you're not afraid at all, this might be a really dumb idea. I've seen a lot of like opportunistic entrepreneurs that have no fear, and they'll try anything, but it never works out for them. They're just like jumping from opportunity to opportunity, no fear. And it's like fear is good for you. It helps you to avoid doing stupid stuff. So they do a lot of stupid stuff ultimately, and sometimes they make money, sometimes they don't, but it never turns into an infant organization. It's really just an affair. They're just screwing around, if you will. Exclusive focus on making money. So that's typically a bad problem if it's just about money, if you will. Now let's talk about the pathology that happens in courtship. And again, this is called an affair. You could see those lines where it's just like early death. It just goes into decline immediately. That means this is going to kill you. Okay. So this is the worst problem to have in courtship. An affair. What is an affair but lots of enthusiasm with no real commitment? So it's real exciting, but nobody's committed to anything, right? That's an affair. So commitment is the key, if you will, to go from courtship to infancy. Make sense? And then to be successful in courtship, when the founder makes the bold decision to quit their day job, mortgage their house, accept the seed capital, take the loan out, whatever it is, like to take the real risk, because there's always a risk, right? Some kind of risk. Once they take that risk, the organization is born and instantly moves into infancy. So you go through all these ups and downs, all this hypothetical stuff, all this analysis paralysis, all this excitement, all these affairs and whatnot. And then suddenly you're like, that's it. I've had it. I quit. I'm going for it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to burn my boats, right? That's infancy. Congratulations. You've been born, right? Before that, it's just BS. It's just a lot of talk, basically. So now what's typical of courtship? And what's ideal in courtship? Well, the ideal in courtship, and you can see this in the slides, I hope, if you're seeing the slides at all, and I wouldn't know if you're not, is there could be a variety of values. So we can't say what the values are, okay? It's not just economic. Again, it's not just about money. It could be any value set that gets an organization of some sort started. But during courtship, if you're going to push yourself into infancy, there's got to be a focus on achieving the goal and a belief in the possibility. Remember, we talked about faith, and then we talked about commitment. So the behavior of commitment is a D, is high dominance, right? It's like, I'm going to achieve this goal no matter what. It will be done. I will do whatever it takes to make it happen, right? I will break through. I will fight whatever battles I have to fight, right? That's commitment, right? C's don't have that in the same way, right? There's like analysis paralysis. In fact, a C in courtship is really weak because they're just sitting there wringing their hands being afraid, right? It's not a really great model to have in courtship. I've seen a lot of SCs and Cs, who have a lot of cool ideas, and they're just too afraid to really go for it and truly commit over the long term. And they end up having all these affairs over the years, and they wonder why. Well, they're being their behavioral style too much, right? They're not truly committing. S's a lot of times will drag their feet so much so that they never get into infancy. They never get started. The I actually is an important aspect of this kind of psychographic picture we're talking about here, because the I is the one that has the optimism, the dreamer, the faith, right? That comes from an I. So if you're a DI, you probably get into infancy pretty quick. If you're willing to like do what it takes that you actually have in spades. If you're just an I, you might struggle a bit. If you're just a D, you could probably still do it, although you may not be quite as optimistic as the I. And then if you're in the IS or the SC or the Core S or Core C category, even a DC for the most part, is going to really struggle to get out of courtship and into infancy because they have a lack of optimism, a lot of times, lack of faith, or a lack of commitment on their part, or lack of both. So if you're an SC, what are you going to do, right? Well, first of all, you don't have to be your behavioral style, right? You could still be committed in it and have faith and take a leap of faith. You just got to get your head out of your analytical ass, right? You got to stop looking for everybody to support you. It's like you got to go on your own for a while, probably. Now, is it possible that your courtship might be courting a DI to take over for you to contribute to and support, for them to share in this business? Possibly. I've seen that work. Seen that work quite a few times, actually. That might be the way you handle it. You outsource the DI to somebody else. But if you're not going to outsource it to somebody, you're going to go it alone. You're going to need to fake that for a while and take on the kind of commitment and optimism that D's and I's do. It's going to be quadruply as hard for you, chances are, but you can certainly do it. Any human being can. And that gets you into infancy, gets you past this very challenging part of your development. So again, this is very idealistic. This is not saying that only D's and I's can get into infancy. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this is the general mindset that's the strongest for successfully moving past courtship. Have a successful courtship, and it's not just an affair. All right, now let's move into infancy. It's the second stage. Now, in infancy, things change a little bit behaviorally and quite a bit values-wise, because you need to fulfill certain values in infancy in order to survive. So infancy is the moment financial risk has been undertaken, the founder quits their paying job, etc. We already said that, basically. Infant organizations are action-oriented and opportunity-driven. The focus instantly changes from ideas to action. You're going from dreaming, like high-I world, or just theoretical world, to now we have to do it. Let's do it. And you're just constant action, right? So usually that action needs to come in the form of sales and getting cash, like raising capital, making sales, influencing people to spend money with your product or service, something like that. That's infancy, right? Now you're a real baby. And just like a real baby, you've been born. Infant organizations need two things to survive. They need milk. They need infusion of milk, which is otherwise known as operating capital, cash, a lot of sales or somebody investing in you. And then two, unconditional love from the parents, right? If a baby doesn't have love, physically being held and stroked and that kind of stuff, failure to thrive syndrome occurs and they die, right? So a baby needs loving parents, basically. And a baby organization, infant organization, must have love from the founder in this case, or the founders and partners in the organization. If they don't love that baby company enough, company will die. So you got to have money, and you got to have money and love. Talking about two opposites, right? Or two seeming opposites. So during infancy, there's crises all the time. They appear with little notice. Infant organizations lack systems. It's very easy for them to get into trouble because they have no control, right? They're still down here with control and they have a lot of flexibility. They're just starting to grow, but the control is like slim to none. And moving from one crisis to the next, totally normal. So if you start a business, like start your coaching business, right? And you're like, oh my God, I don't have enough money for this. And oh my God, that client quit. And oh my God, what am I gonna do with this? And how does this work? And it's like all this craziness and you're just failing all the time. Congratulations, you're in infancy. Like that's what it looks like when it's working, right? And we got a lot of infant companies out there that you will consult, little companies making $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, something like that. Two-man show, 3-man show, maybe 6 people, something like that. And you'll go and consult with them and they'll think the sky is falling. And your job as a coach is to remind them, no, it's not. It's really, this is totally normal. So there are good problems to have when you're an infant company. You're not going to have a very perfect product or service. It's going to be very imperfect. Your commitment as a founder, if you're working with the founder, their commitment is constantly tested. They're constantly wondering, should I really be doing this at all? I remember a story about the founder of FedEx. he started FedEx and they were struggling to survive, and they were doing so badly at one point, and he had just had it. He took a vacation to Vegas, or he took a trip to Vegas. He went to, I can't remember if it was a corporate trip or a vacation, one or the other, doesn't matter. But he went to the roulette table, and he took out all the company's money. He took all the money from the company. He said, you know what? I have no clue. I have total fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I have no clue whether I'm wasting my life or if this is the right thing to do, because we're just failing constantly. And he took all the money out of the company and he put it all on black, or just one number, and he put it all on a color, I think. And he spun, and they spun the wheel. He was willing to gamble the future of that company on, like, if we lose all the money, I quit. That's it. I'm out. This is just an affair, right? Or I'm going to the founder trap, basically. And luckily he won. He took all the money, put it back in the company, and the rest is history, basically. But your commitment as a founder is constantly tested in infancy. Negative cash flow happens all the time in infancy. One person show, no delegation, right? It's like you just feel like you're alone in infancy a lot of times. Management by crisis, right? Like crisis to crisis. You're just managing things when they blow up, right? All that kind of stuff happens during infancy. If these are the kind of problems you're experiencing, there's a good chance you're still in infancy. If your client is experiencing these problems, it's a good chance there's an aspect of their company that's still in infancy, even if they don't think they are, and they've been around for 2 decades. So now these are some bad problems. You don't want to have these problems during infancy. Lack of activity, lack of stress. You actually should be stressed a bit during infancy. If you're not stressed, you're really laid back. I remember years ago, my company was in infancy, and we were making good money at the time, and I just outsourced everything to my assistants, because I just read the 4-hour work week, and I went off to take a vacation and do whatever I felt like. And I was just really laid back about it. I was like, yeah, I've done it. I'm living the lifestyle. I'm cool. And then everything turned belly up very, very fast. And I learned I wasn't stressed enough about my organization, because I was still in infancy and I thought it was like aristocracy or something. And of course, I learned that very quickly. Businesses teach you very quickly when you're deluded. Even if you don't want to learn it, it's hard not to learn the lesson, or else your company dies. So lack of activity, lack of stress, being caught up in excess perfection. So perfectionism is a problem in infancy. Can't be perfect in infancy. Making endless product improvements without validating them in the marketplace. No tolerance for error. Like everything's got to be right. You're like right, wrong, right, wrong. There's a team member I'm working with, and she's constantly telling me I'm addicted to doing everything right. And I already know she's never going to get her company out of infancy. She's going to have to keep her job with us for quite a while unless she changes that. The good news is she knows about it, so she can probably handle it. That's an awareness thing, right? That's part of what assessment coaching is about. So unable to get sales or key footholds in marketplace, rigid set procedures, rules, policies, and systems. Rigidity is not good when you're 5 years old. Like 5-year-old rigid when you're 5 means that you've got some kind of disease. Slow decisions, paralysis by analysis. These are all problems, big problems in infant organizations if you've got them. Pathology of infant organization, like where an infant organization could die. Infant mortality, which is basically just running out of money. If the founders lose their commitment and their interest in their baby, this thing's not going to make it. Attempts to transform an infant organization into a more structured and predictable organization are premature and often harmful. So you're trying to make this into bureaucracy and stuff, not good when you're in infancy. Prescription for infant success. Like this is what it takes to make an infant company successful. Companies in their infancy require a strong arm to keep them on course. So you got to be a strong governor of your vision. A founder who can galvanize and unite the efforts of the employees by providing clarity, certainty, and security in the face of overwhelming uncertainty and lack of clarity. That's what you got to be in infancy as a leader. Not every leader in an infant company is like that, and they need to be. That's why they have infant mortality, or they just stay babies forever. They turn into Peter Pan. Everyone in an infant company must be action-oriented and driven by an unquenchable thirst for results. Can you imagine that? Just a bunch of results-oriented people? That's what you need in an infant organization. So infancy is not a time to work on decentralization and consensus making. So this is not when you're trying to like make everybody happy and make sure everybody's like sees eye to eye. This is not a good time to do that. It's crucial that founders make every major decision until the company stabilizes itself with repeat sales to key accounts, positive cash flow, and increasing demand. That's what you got to create in infancy. Sell, 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 make all decisions. You got to be a tyrant sometimes and push the company forward, whether people like it or not. And everybody's got to be in action there. If they're not, you're going to have an anchor around the neck of this organization. So that is infancy. So what do we have in infancy? Well, in the behavioral spectrum, we've now actually diversified a little bit. We're not just pure D's and I's now. We've got some C's that can be in it. Now, the C's need D's and I's to keep them in action, obviously. This is an action-oriented group still. But you can have some S's and C's filtering in to support this culture. But the bottom line is you've got to have everybody be action-oriented enough. I mean, in fact, everybody in this culture that you're looking at here, they're all got at least an I or a D. There's no pure C's and S's or SC's in this group at all. Right? So there's still a good DI, overly optimistic, overly action-oriented. That's the culture of an infant organization if it's going to make it and not just die off very quickly. So that's the behavioral structure. Not that different from courtship, frankly. It's kind of a lot of more of the same, but a little bit more diverse. Now, that said, in infancy, you got to have very specific values in your organization based upon what we just read that Adizes talks about. So you've got to want the money. If your economic value is not there as an organization, that you don't have a culture that's for money's sake, that's really strong for money, like you're not going to have a company very long because money keeps the company alive, right? At best, what you'll do is you'll fold eventually and go work for an economically different company because they're going to be the ones that are going to eat your lunch. So you can see mostly it's economic and the power value, wanting to influence, get the sales, influence the people around you to do what you want them to do. So it's all money and power that drives a company successfully through infancy to the point where it truly starts growing. If you don't have enough of that value, you need to get that. I'll tell you from personal experience, I did not value these things initially in my infant organization. And I found very quickly I suffered tremendously as a result of it. And I got economic valuation very quickly. Like I taught myself to feel like I needed that money to show up and to be driven by that. And it's still a major part of kind of my drive in an organization. It's definitely not my top, but it's up there in the top 3 because I understand it's like we have that or we die, right? It's not a choice. It's not like something where it's bad to have money. It's like you want to have that opinion. Like you can have it outside of work, but if that's going to drive your work, you're going to go through infant mortality. It's just a matter of time. Or somebody's keeping you alive and you're already in bureaucracy. So money and power drives an infant company through to the growth phase of the organization. There can, to some extent, be theoretical and altruistic values in this stage. Now, why would that be? Well, first of all, this company's got to give enough so they can make sales, right? They've got to make their key accounts happy. They've got to care enough about how well is their product formulating in the marketplace. So they made a contribution in the marketplace so that they continue to grow through infancy. So altruism is to some extent maybe needed, at least operationally speaking. And the theoretical piece here is more about understanding what's needed at the time and learning the lessons that the market has to teach you. There is, you want to be driven by truth in an infant organization. If you're just like a one-track mind and you're not willing to learn, you're probably not going to be around very long. And you probably go through infant mortality as well, no matter how much you love money and power. So does that make sense? Those are the values that, and again, this is not like right or wrong, right? I'm just giving you, this is a way to think about what might be needed in a stage of a company's development for varying purposes, right? So again, this isn't correct. This is just like one individual's opinion about the values and behavioral styles of an organization that would, I mean, if I saw an organization look like this that was in infancy, I'd be pretty damn optimistic that they're in pretty good shape until, at least until they get into go-go. So let's now skip past the go-go and adolescent stage, other than to say that in go-go and adolescence, you're making some really big shifts. You're shifting from everything for more growth, because when you're an infant, everything is about I need more, I need more, I need more. You're going from only growth mindset, which is really kind of how you enter into go-go, into profit first, growth second. So then you're looking for profitable growth, not just growth at any cost. Because really, you got negative revenue usually, or negative profit in infancy. In go-go, you're probably barely profitable. But if you're going to get to adolescence and eventually to prime, profit has to be damn important, because you're not going to be able to generate the organizational framework without a highly profitable business model. You're also shifting from just managing by crisis, managing by the seat of the pants, managing by intuitive management, intuition, into professional systematic management. This is when, sometime between go-go and adolescence, is when the entrepreneur has to hand their organization over to a professional business person, a professional manager. I saw that coaching company I mentioned a little while ago. I saw them go from an entrepreneur that was just driven by revenue, who was in infancy and in go-go stage, to handing his business off to some professional managers. And he was actually about to go belly up. I mean, he was about to lose his whole organization. He was in the founder family trap, or premature aging. He was in one of these problems where he just wasn't good enough to get past his own myopia. And then he was going broke in the process. And he said, here, take this organization. He basically handed the organization to these two professional managers, and they grew that organization from like $500,000 a year to $5 million a year, because he had to go into adolescence somehow in order to stay alive. So this is when professional managers take over, and you got to give your company away. So think of like Steve Jobs as an entrepreneur, and then he brings in professional managers. He brings in Scully, who's was Pepsi, and he brings in all these people who know how to run a big organization, and they brought the organization, Apple, into adolescence ultimately, right? And of course, there were problems that occurred for them as well that brought the founder back, but at least they got to the point where there's a sustainable organization. So generally speaking, in these two stages, go-go and adolescence, you're making the first significant shift over to control versus flexibility. You're now starting to peak in your flexibility, and you're becoming less flexible. You're becoming a little bit more rigid, and you're gaining in control still. You're getting closer to prime, right? More managers are coming in, people that know how to run things. The stuffed shirts are there, and they're gonna make sure this thing is run correctly and is grown correctly as well, where the opportunist was just like, I'll do whatever it takes to make a buck. That party is over, and now it's time to move on. It's time to grow and mature. So this maturing process might look like this. You can see we're bringing in C's and even S's at this point. Professional managers who systemize, handle the details. They're bringing in, systems thinking into the organization, right? They're preventing dumb moves all of a sudden. Now, you still got a lot of D and a lot of I in this organization. You got a lot of go-getters who are in adolescence and still growth-minded, but they're now balanced between introvert and extrovert. People are holding down the fort, making sure everything runs on time, and the people who are going to go, fight the battles to grow the business. In the value side of things, you're bringing in regulatory as a value. You're still bringing in more theoretical as a value, right? You're still thinking about and learning from the mistakes of the organization so you can adapt and make things better. The economics is still highly valued. You got to do that in order to continue to grow. And there's still somewhat of a power value, but it becomes secondary because now power is actually being given away and distributed throughout the organization. This is when some consensus begins to matter. And you're trying to find consensus between these opportunistic, crazy entrepreneur people and these more kind of straight and narrow, more rigid control freaks that are trained MBAs that can run an organization well. And they have to make friends to some extent. That could be hard. So there's got to be a sharing of power during this time. So that's why I put power where it's at and regulatory where it's at. Now we're balancing the economic drive, the money drive, with regulatory drive and the need to control the organization and regulate things. Make sense? So that's the go-go and adolescence period. Finally, if you successfully make this shift over to professional management, now you've got a combination of control and flexibility, and now you're in prime. This is what we're looking to achieve as organizations. So you're making this shift, and prime is the optimal position in the life cycle where the organization finally achieves a balance between control and flexibility. The infrastructure provides reliable support, right? Those managers have set up systems. The governance process is institutionalized. So it's not just like people like seat the pants saying, let's do this today. Like you're an institution now. One of the big things I do with a lot of the high-level managers in that $5 million coaching organization is I'm teaching them and pushing them to create systems and to make sure that they're not the only one that can do their job, and to codify things and to train and establish training frameworks for their organization to groom new leaders in the organization to move up the ranks and be able to kind of duplicate their efforts, right? This is adolescent type of processes that needs to happen to get to prime because they're not quite there yet. So let's see, where was I on this? Infrastructure provides reliable support. Governance is institutionalized. People know and understand where and how decisions are made, so they have an easy way to traverse adding value in the organization. Decision-making is done in an environment of healthy, constructive conflict. Like you have a conflict, but you work it out, or you say, that's okay, you'll do it your way, and I can get over it, right? It's not like these people are like breaking it off just because they didn't get their way. That organizations can't grow if they can't have any kind of, not consensus, but any way of making a final decision that not everybody is going to agree with. So integration and cohesion with clients, suppliers, investors, and the community starts to occur here because the prime organization is as optimal. It's the most valuable to the community. It's the highest quality form of the organization. So this is where the organization makes the biggest contribution to the world. Senior management of companies in prime engages in a continuous struggle to maintain the delicate balance between flexibility and control. It takes very little to push a company in either direction. When administrators gain the upper hand, the company's balance swings in the direction of excessive control. It starts to fall, and the company sacrifices flexibility. When entrepreneurs gain the upper hand, the company regresses to more flexibility, but they lose control, right? So they're regressing to a more adolescent phase in the company. That's not a good thing either necessarily. So you got to maintain this balance here. So how do you maintain a balance within a prime organization? Well, the first thing is you need infinite behavioral diversity. You could see everybody's everything here. The only thing that you don't necessarily want to serve at the greatest extent would be the S, because nothing but S, that's where bureaucracy starts to happen. I mean, the worst of an S would be total bureaucracy, total routine, dogma, if you will. So again, obviously there's wonderful things about S's as well that we won't get into that for the moment. But so I've avoided, that core S, but everything else we basically totally could be a part of what makes prime great. And so prime organization has all parts of the behavioral wheel represented, so it's not a flat wheel. So it's a nice round wheel that keeps rolling forward. When it comes to values, still have to have some economics and some power, but now we have the need for individualism, the need for freedom from the organization, so we don't have to like give up our life and just give to the organization. We give up some power so we can have some of our freedom back, right? As leaders. We're also got to be a bit altruistic with each other, because we have to give and take in the organization, not just take anymore. Can't be purely greedy at this point. And we still need to value a certain amount of regulatory, or else we can't maintain prime, as we just talked about. So why wouldn't we want aesthetics during prime? Well, aesthetics are about perfection, and there's no such thing when you're in prime. You're always going for the next level, right? And in theoretical, this is not about theory. This is about practice, right? So yes, there are going to be some aesthetics and theoreticals depending on the organization, but they shouldn't be the centerpiece of the corporate culture for most organizations that maintain prime, in my opinion. Okay, I'm sure there's exceptions that'll prove that rule. Okay, so what about the fall? What about problematic models? Well, let's look at aristocracy. So aristocracy is the climate. The climate in an aristocratic organization is stale, right? It starts to be stale. It starts to become stale. It starts to become rigid. You're more controlled and less flexible now. Having reduced expectations for growth, they demonstrate little interest in conquering new markets or technologies or frontiers, right? They're not as flexible for those things. And they generally start focusing on past achievements. It's almost like the culture starts to become nostalgic. They focus on past achievements rather than future visions. They become suspicious of change. I wonder what kind of people do that. They reward those who do what they're told to do and punish those who do not. So somebody's really kind of a maverick and they go out there and try new things, they get punished. Primarily, an aristocratic organization is interested in holding on to what they have and reducing their risks. You can imagine what kind of culture that becomes. And so I've mapped it out here. When you become like this, you're gonna fall, right? Your organization is no longer growing; it's now in decline, right? At least the beginning of decline. Aristocracy, by the way, usually still has a lot of money. They're aristocracy, right? Like they really think well of themselves, and they're rich, and they're at the top of the top. I mean, they think they're amazing at this point, but they're becoming rigid, and they're becoming ossified as power structures. They're stuck, if you will. So aristocratic organizations, that's right, they're stuck in more of a CS type of mindset. Again, we're just talking about the worst of this. So it doesn't mean that as an SC you can't have a job at an organization that's in prime. You just can't be the only part of that culture. Remember diversity? So we're on a polyculture, not a monoculture. We become a monoculture where the primary mindset is protecting yourself and staying the same. You're dying as an organization. That's the bottom line. So if you're an SC and you have a bunch of SCs on your team, number one, get some Ds and Is. And number two, learn to think like a DI, right? You can adapt in that mindset if you're going to lead that organization. Then in values-wise, you still have somewhat of a value of economics, but regulatory is way more important. You're not as concerned about because maximizing money would be grow. You'd have to grow to do that. You don't want to do that, so you want regulation. You're stuck in theory, and then aesthetics start to matter. Imagery starts to matter. How you dress, like the boardroom and what it looks like. Everything is about making it look successful rather than be successful. Make sense? So then we get into superficial aesthetics, theoretical, like just ideas but not truth, and regulation. We're starting to move towards bureaucracy here in the aristocratic side. Now, finally, let's talk about bureaucrats. Bureaucracy, this is where systems and rules are still there, of course, but it all runs on ritual, not reason. Like you're just doing things for dogmatic purposes. Leaders usually feel little sense of control in a bureaucracy. They're not in charge of anything. The bureaucracy is in charge. The system is now running the show. The inmates are running the asylum, so to speak. And they're internally disassociated, meaning they're like nobody's really connecting and making things move in any particular direction. There's little pressure to perform. So as long as so long as no one abides by the rules and regulations. Bureaucratic managers are among the nicest people you'll ever meet. That's why I put some eyes in here, right? So they might be really nice, but they're just kind of asleep at the wheel. Like an older person who follows a set routine every day. They're very controlled, but not very flexible. They've hit zero flexibility, even though they still have a lot of control. They become highly aggravated with any change. Like the organization can't handle change anymore. Bureaucracies resent outside disruptions and aggressively create obstructions to limit those disruptions. So when IBM was a bureaucracy, and then this, I can't remember who it was, came in and he got the bureaucracy to move back to Prime, he made a bunch of changes in the DNA of the organization, the culture of the organization, to move them more towards a Prime culture rather than a bureaucratic culture. And then he wrote this book, I think like How to Teach an Elephant to Dance. And he was like, there's this big organization, we got it to dance, right? We got it to get moving again, right? And he's talking about moving it back from bureaucracy, back from the brink. Does that make sense? So what we have behaviorally here is mostly S's and C's, fear and, just getting stuck in the details, getting stuck in, just routine for routine's sake. And then everything, the only value in the organization at this point is regulatory. So that's what a bureaucracy probably looks like. You want to watch for that. So we've covered a lot here in terms of these different parts of the corporate life cycle. And we've covered a ton around like what the different models may look like as I try to figure out how to not share my screen anymore. I think we got it. I think we're back. Here we go. And what I'd invite you to do is a couple things. First of all, like read those books if you're willing. Check out the website. I'll post it up on the comments wherever we have replays here. We have a question. How do you determine the current stage of the organization? Well, you look for these signs that we've talked about, first of all. So that part is more of being a good business technician, like understanding the business and what those signs are. So read those books and you become an expert in that, I'm sure. You can take some trainings in that direction too. And by experience, just by being in business, it'll help you understand those things and see those things through experience. But gain knowledge, read business books, read this stuff, and also watch for it in your consulting that you're doing. And then also look at, like, run the graphs on these organizations and look at what they look like. I've given you some models for that. So you'll see patterns of the human resources in an organization that looks a little too bureaucratic or looks a little too like the values of the behavior is too aristocratic, or it's, stuck in infancy or something like that. These signs will stick out like a sore thumb. When you run graphs and you interview these people and you talk to them and you get in an organization, you're going to start to be able to take the pulse of the organization. These are about looking for and recognizing the patterns that we've literally been talking about here. So I hope that makes sense. So here's your assignment if you choose to accept it. First of all, what stage in the organization life cycle is your client? Like, think about, like, where might my client be? Just start to speculate on that. Second, what does their leadership or their culture look like? Like, run their wheels if you've run their wheels already, and look at their behavior and value, and look at where their culture is. Does it seem to match up with the stage that you think they're in the life cycle? Does it not? Is that stage pathological? Are they describing to you some of the good problems to have in that stage, or some pathological problems that could create an early demise of that organization? So where are they in their growth, and where's their culture, right? We want to know where the culture is versus what stage they're in, because if there's a mismatch between those two things, that's a good thing to know. What strengths got them to that point in the organization's development? In other words, what do you see in the culture that's actually a good thing that got them to this point, but may not get them to where they want to be? Like, a lot of times you'll have a really amazing high D founder and they get through infancy, but then they're just like in adolescence and they're staying in adolescence. It's like, that's really great that you got to adolescent, but now let's get you to prime. Make sense? So what strengths got them to that point? And then fourth, what good or bad problems are showing up or pathologies are showing up in that organization, or at least are likely showing up in that organization based upon what you see in their wheels. And then finally, fifth, who can you add to the culture? Who can you drop in? Who can you lower into that culture or ask the culture to hire that would, forever shift the culture, that would shift things to keep them growing, to keep them maturing towards prime, or if they're past their prime, to get them to go back to their prime, to find their way back to prime. So those are the actions to take to work on this piece. And again, like I said, I promise I'll post the link to the author's website so you can check that stuff out or read more about it in the future. That said, it has been quite a journey, speaking of maturing, throughout my stages of development in running these live streams over a period of the last 3 years now. The first live streams, I think I was staring into my laptop's camera and talking into my laptop's microphone, looking like I was just not in a really well pictured place. I mean, this is still not perfect, but definitely come a long way, audio AV wise, and trying to figure out, how to convey these finer points. And I was very, very out of control during that period of time. But over that period of time, I'm really grateful for the experience, because I've gotten to a place where I can still come up with some really creative stuff, but I have some control over what I can produce for you, which I'm really grateful for. And I'm looking forward to, changing the way that we do live streams in the future, that aren't going to necessarily be only marking time with our trainings alone, but are going to go deeper and farther to different areas that maybe we don't even cover in our MCU curricula in the future. But we'll see what happens with that. I appreciate you coming on the journey with me. If you haven't been through all the live streams yet, we will make them available to you as we go through different trainings. So you have a chance to really, again, deepen your development and your maturity process to hit prime as a coach, as well as a coaching organization or business. So that said, we want to really make a difference with this information. And so there's 2 ways that you can help us do that. And you can actually do that yourself with what you've learned today. One would be share this stuff with your clients so that they're already kind of indoctrinated into what you're working with them on. Second, share with other leaders, other coaches that could probably use this and make a difference for them. And then finally, third, you could just see this randomly happen in the world just by hitting a thumbs up wherever you're at on this video. If it made a difference for you, and if you like this stuff, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get notifications when we do this in the future. And when you like this stuff, it tells the algorithm to bring more of that kind of stuff to you, which is great for you. But it's also going to serve other people that Google and Facebook knows are similar to they're similar to the people after your own soul. And those individuals will get a chance to access this stuff as well, which we don't necessarily have control over unless the algorithm knows, hey, this was good for someone like yourself. So I appreciate it if you do that. You'll be a part of this mission with me to make a difference with these technologies for organizations and the world eventually, and coaches as well, and leaders if you do it. I'm looking forward to continuing that journey with you very soon. Until then, look forward to seeing what kind of difference this made for you. And please let me know what I could do differently or what questions you have, and I'm happy to answer them. Take care.